in this course, Ed. So he'll be the one to set it up. So that's his card. If you want to take a picture of it, that's his cell number, still legit, and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
So
We work closely with your education staff.
yeah, education staff will know about it. And Shannon, you know Shannon,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to work at Bernalillo too in the early 2000s. Yeah.
You probably heard my name back then about Impact 8 funding.
Yeah, no. But you know what? What's different about there is a lot of the I say southern because I'm from Santa Clara and San but it's northern. But there was a lot.
I'm from New Mexico. I grew up in northern New Mexico, Peñasco. With an S or a Z? I'm an S. Are you Becky Gonzalez?
My dad was Rudolph Gonzalez, Rudy.
Maria Dolores Gonzalez, Cecilia Gonzalez. Yeah, I know some Gonzalez's from there,
I'm sure
but
that we're probably related to some extent.
it's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet
Be in
you,
touch.
Dr. Gonzalez. Thank you.
But we all work well together because we all go to different meetings at the district level, so they're all supportive. We've been there a while. The Indian eds that have been, and there's some I'm concerned about it. But we do work well together. So with Dr. Gonzalez, if we have any issues that we want to have the dialogue. We all meet together on curricula, with bullying or any issue. Either Mr. Parson, myself, or our curriculum manager who's not here today due to personal things, but we do work well together.
It's good to know. Is there issues as far as your, and then it's just not just here, but other states and in our communities, drugs and alcohol. What's the date on it of our kids?
I haven't heard any really from Pueblo, but on the negative side. We have
Our kids in schools here. How do we deal with it?
I haven't had any schools reach out to me about that issue. Mainly families reach out when yeah, so like we have a really good case in that. Myself and Thorne, who's not here today, he and I list the cases that we get. So, our Indian Ed department was established in '74 for advocacy for our Native students. Yeah, and so because some of my colleagues, in the school, don't handle this bullying cases, I have to say that first, so that because I'm here to support my Native family and my colleagues as well, but sometimes they're overloaded with work and
She says that it's your own education department. She talks about it's already been established. It goes in Jeffrey's from the APS, she's kind of went off the board, so there's touching on executive issues that is however, everybody has their own opinion. That's what I said. It's important in education, but you already established it, as you said before.
That's what I was. We need to address what she is saying because it's making us like I'm not doing my job or we're not doing it. But we are, I'm telling you that. I don't know. know, so our doors, Mr. Parsons says this, and I said, our doors are always open for any you guys want to come visit. We're at the Twin Towers by the Coronado Mall, fourth floor, West Tower. And if you guys have any families or you guys have concerns or want to address something, send us an email, call us, and
Okay. It's good right here, no?
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna give him one.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So you know,
Maybe thinking, go over to meet with the kids around here.
and we've been since I started in Mid-Ed, Mr. Carlson and I have been reaching out to San Felipe and other Karish speaking, saying we want Karish language, but it's always been up to the tribal council or the government to say yes or no, you know, and so. Hearing you guys say that, you know, we totally want that, and we can work with you all in finding that right person. Because I used to work in Santa Ana, so and what I learned over there was the kids from Santa Ana can't hear something because they say their ears are pierced or until they're initiated, you know, and so I was like, and then I learned from a lady from Cuba at a language conference in Santa Fe that they only teach kids and the female that's from there, you know, and so it's like, oh, there's all these different guidelines each fellow has, but, you know, we're willing to accommodate that to see how we could get it rolling. And in terms of teaching identity, I feel it should come from the family or the community. I can teach English speaking people and what it says I feel comfortable, traditional and non-traditional. If they come from Santa Clara, I can tell them. If they come from Mexico, I can share that. But I can't teach identity. But what we can do as a department, if you have community members that want to teach arts and crafts or something, we can help accommodate that, you know, and provide an area for it.
Everybody still loading this?
Possibly by the supply side. We have Acoma coming to do, they did a cooking class a couple weeks ago. Last year they did dressmaking and opposite making units. Huh? Yeah. Anything you want to do, like teach your kids, I can help organize that.
So any of the native kids within the APS have a place to hang out? You know, because you're dealing with how many nations and pueblos? That's a lot.
100 of different tribes.
Yeah.
Locally and outside.
Like, establish a place like this for them to hang out after school. Well, talk among each other and still try and practice
We
talking
have
their language.
an indigenous lifeway center that we choose because people, some of my colleagues, like the lady who spoke,
Yeah.
she was really experienced and very excited about language teachers and that kind of thing. The hierarchy. And it was all due to complaining. Yeah, pretty much. It really set us back. Our director established that for the year, and it took us like 20 steps. But you know, my idea, my goal.
Okay, if everyone could find their seats, and we'll go ahead and get started with our afternoon presentations. So as you see on the agenda, first up we have Dr. Melanie Blea, who is our Executive Director for Federal and State Programs. And she's going to be presenting on our unified application that we do for Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll have opportunity for more conversations around questions around our federal and state programming at that time.
Well, hello, everyone. Again, good afternoon. Happy post-lunch coming back. We're going to speak a little bit about funding at the federal level, and then I know Phil's going to speak to you all a little bit about funding that's allocated specifically for Indian Ed and the programming within that. They're both related, and we need input and conversation around both. I do want to allude to something that Dr. Gonzalez said earlier this morning around Guardrail 2 and allocating resources equitably. That's one of the things we're going to talk about when we discuss our title funding as well as Perkins funding, which are all federal-based funds. We really are working towards a more equity-based system from head to toe, and that includes funding and allocation of resources. So currently, this is about, and these numbers fluctuate because we have planning awards and then we receive final awards and there's carryover. But this is about the amount that APS receives currently this school year in the 4 titles in Medicaid revenue and Perkins, which is Career Connected Learning. We will provide you with a copy of the slideshow so you have it. Briefly, I'm not going to read the slide, but briefly, Title I funds are used for students who are economically disadvantaged, living in poverty. Those funds are given specifically to school sites with a higher poverty percentage. And Phil just reminded me this is in your folder. Title II is specifically for professional development, recruitment, retention of teachers, and I know that's also been a hot topic here. Title III is for students who speak a different language, English learners, and funds that are used to ensure that that programming is accurate. Title IV are used to support students and schools in 3 very specific domains. Those are well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and effective use of technology. Again, I've heard inklings of all of this as we've talked this morning. Medicaid funds are used to improve and expand health and health-related services. So think counselors, nurses, school-based counseling. A lot of Medicaid funds are used for that purpose. And then Perkins 5, of course, is used for career-connected learning, connected to specific pathways within the state, the region, and the district. What's new this year, and what's new to all of you that I don't think you've heard of, and maybe you have, in the past, what has happened with New Mexico is that districts will apply for Title I funds, and there's a separate allocation for Title I. Separate allocation for Title II, Title III, Title IV. Previously, this role that I'm in, this office did not exist. And so one of the directives Dr. Blakey gave is noticing the gap, had this office initiated and said, we need one person, one office to comprehensively review Titles 1, 2, 3, 4 as a whole, not separately. And then consequently, the PED is launching a pilot effort with what they're calling the Unified Application, which does exactly the same thing for the application of Titles 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we're doing in APS, what PED is moving towards, is a very comprehensive look at all programs versus siloing them. One of the other big initiatives of this office is to identify and eliminate duplication of services, because what happens, through no fault of anyone, but what happens is if you're not speaking to one another, we're funding family engagement in Title I, we're funding family engagement in Title III, in Title IV, in Medicaid, and while there are very specific reasons for that, there is some duplicity. And so understanding that there are different programs and different groups we need to speak with and engage, they may not necessarily require funding out of each and every area. So this is new in the sense that it's a comprehensive look at all of our funding sources. I shouldn't say all, most of our funding sources from the federal level. All right, so I'm gonna briefly speak to Title I. I want to be clear that this was actually done a couple weeks ago when Phil and I prepared, and I will say this has changed slightly, and that these are preliminary kind of projections for what we have. So things are moving and swaying. But right now, we have $27.9 million of our award that goes directly to schools and school-based personnel. So Title I, the overwhelming majority goes to schools. And then you see $2.5 million for McKinney-Vento. That's a required set-aside for students who are experiencing homelessness. So there's set aside there. And then there's approximately $730,000 towards family engagement. The federal law mandates that at least 1% of Title I is taken for family engagement activities. So there are many other expenditures in Title I, but to give you all kind of a bird's eye view, those are the 3 largest expenditures, and those will continue next year to be the 3 largest expenditures. We increased the overall amount of Title I that goes to schools this school year, moving into next year. So the numbers will change, but the overall way in which we're making sure that funds go to schools does not. So more of Title I funds are going directly to schools and less off the top for set-asides. Title II is specifically for professional development and recruitment retention of teachers. So we have the majority of Title II going to fund resource teachers. Those are at central office. They're content specific. They go and they work directly with schools in supporting high quality instructional materials, in lesson planning and differentiation, basically rolling out the strategic plan. So the majority of Title II funds are spent on those salaries. The largest expenditure after that is professional development, and this does include funding for Indian education. So professional development can look like culturally and responsive teaching. It can look like using the materials that we have adopted as a district. How do you use them? How do you adapt them? Looking at the units of study, as Dr. Gonzalez alluded to, and aligning our teaching to the content standards, not necessarily a program. So there's various professional development sessions that we roll out. Some of them are specific to role groups, but we are rolling them out district-wide.
On behalf of Santo Domingo, I run the risk of asking questions like instead of waiting, but there's a lot of content here and all of these titles are really important. So if you don't mind, I think some of the tribal leaders would like to focus on one slide and ask questions about it before they wait to the end, if that's okay.
Sure, we can go back to Title I if you want to.
No, let's start with Title II.
Title II? Let's start with Title II.
How much of the 1.2 million is set aside for Indian Ed?
I believe it's 50,000 because
And where is that set? Is that set in the Title II program, or is that an APS set aside?
so Title II funding is given to APS by the PED, flowed through from the federal government.
Right.
And then at the district level, this time last year, the decision was made to allocate $50,000 to Indian Ed to help with professional development.
So who makes that decision?
So I don't know who made it last year because there were different superintendents, different members of leadership, and I was not involved.
Okay. Who's going to make it coming up?
So I'm going to talk to that. It's usually stakeholder input, and and exactly what we're doing here is part of the decision making.
Thank you.
So if you have just 2 seconds, I'll get to it, and then if you still have questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Okay. The other thing I want to mention, the largest expenditure from Title II is our principal residency program. So we do have a longstanding partnership with the University of New Mexico. There are 12 principal candidates that are going through their residency. It's a year-long residency. So Title II pays for partial tuition reimbursement, substitutes for those teachers who are currently teachers and going to be principals, as well as some professional development and supplies for them. So we also have set aside money for recruitment and retention for hard-to-fill positions, which would include native language teachers. And I just want to acknowledge that that was something that has been said, and you all have historically said, and you continue to say this morning is, I think, a need. And so there are funds that are going directly toward recruitment and retention of hard-to-fill positions. Title III, again, specifically to students who are learning English as their second language, the majority goes to professional development, and this is specific for teachers. So teachers attend various professional development opportunities, and they learn to work with students in different content areas. So for example, if I have a student who speaks a different language, a language other than English, how would I work with that student or those students in math? How would I work with them in reading and writing? How do I get the content to them in a way that helps them, that helps them understand what they're doing? So the majority goes to professional development. Teachers, that is an ask from schools, from principals, from teachers. It's a need that we recognize as a district. We have an increasing number of students who are enrolling in our district who speak a different language, or I should say another language, I shouldn't say different, but a language other than English. And so we need to equip our educators to work with those students so that they can have access to the content. Right now, we have 5 English language resource teachers that work with these students and teachers in particular at school sites, they go and they work with them, model lessons, help them set up the classroom to be accessible, make sure students, if they need to, have a schedule that's accessible for them. Their work is very differentiated depending on the needs that they're called out to do. There's 5 of them right now. And then a little over 350,000 goes directly to schools in the school-based model, and they typically use that for professional development and or specific materials, usually libraries, things of that nature. Title IV, the biggest expenditures from Title IV are counseling, nursing, and what we call coordinated school health. Those are programs like volunteers, attendance initiatives come out of that, family engagement initiatives come out of that. So the biggest expenditures from Title IV are in those 3 departments. We do have money set aside for teachers. That includes an outdoor resource teacher. That includes MLSS support, so multi-layered systems of support, those teachers, that staff. There's also some technology teachers, ed tech teachers that are part of this funding. School police also receives this funding. A lot of what they do with it is background checks, making sure we have school safety plans set up. That's one of the ways that we use Title IV funding. But again, nursing, counseling, those are the big ones that come out of Title IV.
Question from Santo Domingo. There's over 1,000 Pueblo students. It's actually over 1,100 if you count the Hopis as well, which are related to those Pueblos. But there's for sure over 1,000 Pueblo students. Has APS, Indian Ed Department, or APS in general done a study to see of those 1,000 students, how many of them have asked for counseling and been rejected because it's too busy? Or is it that every one of the students that have asked for counseling or their parents have gotten it? And I'm not asking for like just generally the funding. It's a more in-depth question because I think a lot of the tribal leaders here, having dealt through the pandemic and all the repercussions from that, and given all the social ills that exist in our societies, that's a really big issue, is to make sure that these funds are targeted to, and I'll say Pueblo students, I'm sure Navajo Nation can say to their students as well, but to make sure that those resources are seriously passed down so that the students who need those resources can get them.
You're good, just hit the slide, next slide.
Medicaid.
So the next slide is Medicaid, okay? This is where school-based counseling comes out of. There are currently 13 providers that we partner with in APS for students to receive school-based counseling. The difference between, and I'm not an expert, but I will say, the difference between a school counselor and school-based counseling is very different. So school counselors can help with in-the-moment things. They also do a lot of prevention and a lot of guidance. School-based counseling is, I think, more what you're getting to, which is I need to see someone ongoing, typical to a therapy session. I can ask the counseling department. I know they're super sensitive and confidential with what they collect. I will say there are not enough providers for the need in APS. It is not, at this point, a funding barrier. The barrier are the providers being able to come into the schools and have the ratio needed for providers to students and families who may need it. I do know that the counseling department keeps a running list of resources, both in the school and then outside resources, should the family be able to do something like that, so that they can go do that on their own if, in fact, something is booked, or the student may not qualify if they're not receiving some type of government service with some providers. But I do want to emphasize, because that has been, school-based counseling continues to be an ask from every stakeholder group that we talk with. And at this point, and quote me, as of today, that the funding is not a barrier for that. So to your question, I think we can work with Phil and see if we can get you some information on that from the counseling department. Medicaid, okay, and Medicaid is revenue. Currently, we receive between $18 and $20 million a year in revenue. I will say that right now, as of today, we have not received revenue for next year, which may or may not come. But that's a huge funding source for us as a district. You all know, a lot of our students and families live in poverty and or need government assistance, and so that's huge for us. The next funding source, and I think I'm almost done, is CTE, Career Connected Learning, Career Technical Education. Perkins, we receive approximately $1 million for Perkins. One of the things, and I'm going to repeat this, is I heard you all say native language teachers. One of the approved programs of study is education. One of the programs of study we have in APS is Educators Rising. So we have acknowledged, and there are some students of Native heritage who are enrolled in Educators Rising with the goal of becoming a teacher, and then above and beyond that, a native language teacher. So although this will not fix our issue today, it is a long-term kind of pipeline that we are trying to build. If you're interested in education and you want to bring the cultural language part with you, let's help you get there, give you a leg up so that when you enter college, you have a background to do that. So, but we do fund programs of study, and we can get you, and I think we should get you data on the number of students that are enrolled and which programs of study, because that is a huge success for APS that I don't know that we spotlight often. So we can work to get you some of those numbers. And then to your first question about stakeholder group consultations, and I apologize if you can't see this, we constantly talk to different groups. So obviously the cabinet's involved, upper leadership is involved and works with us in driving some decisions, but we also work through what are called school dash plans. Those are school improvement plans or 90-day plans. You may have heard those called. Through those plans, there's a root cause analysis. There is a review of data at every school, and then what their needs are. Those plans are constantly being monitored, addressed, and reflected upon every 30 days. And those plans are good once a semester. So through a bird's eye view at all of the plans that our schools have devised, we look and see what are their biggest needs. Obviously, it's proficiency in language arts, it's proficiency in math. Above and beyond that, what are they needing? What is their data telling them? And where are they putting their resources? We have surveyed principals and charter leaders. What is it that you need? What is it that you want? In terms of professional development, in Title III as an example, what do you want? So that we can provide that to them and not just assume that they know. We do work with department leads. We've also had several community budget meetings. We had those back in October, and then we did have tribal consultation. So honestly, it's data from everywhere. And so like I said, the big things are native language, teachers, as well as health, mental health, and then kind of just being culturally aware and bringing the cultural richness to the classroom. Those are three kind of themes I've heard emerging from a lot of these stakeholder groups. So the last thing moving forward, Phil? No. I'm almost done, and then you can talk, sir. Yes. So I want to address kind of the elephant in the room. So at APS, as with any other district or entity who receives federal funds, we are, as much as possible, keeping abreast of events as they unfold. We're not panicking, we are planning. So we're strategizing, we're prioritizing. If this goes away, what happens next? If we lose X, what do we do? So what I have heard this group say, and what you all have historically said, the three, and I've said this throughout my presentation, so I want, you gotta speak up or forever hold your peace. The three things I hear you say, if we have to prioritize at this time, would be those three items. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, if we can only fund one thing, if we can only fund two things, or if we have to pull from here, there, and everywhere, what is it that we value? And where do we want our resources to go? And this is something we're doing in various ways with different sources of money, depending on what funds are going to which programs. So I think to answer your question, we're aware, we're planning as much as we possibly can with all of the unknowns that are occurring. And we are partnering with the PED to make sure, and they're very good at whatever they know or don't know, we're communicating.
Thank you, Dr. Blea. So this is a tribal consultation. So those of you in the front row and some of the others, you should have in your folder the affirmation of consultation. So as we continue on, as we go through these things, I would ask that some of the notes you take, things that you wish to give us feedback on, this is a great place to put that so that we're making sure that we're capturing in other ways any other thoughts that you have that you want to make sure to give us feedback on. We do, let me see, what are we on for time? So it's like Dr. Blades just talked about titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. But we also, I believe, have some time. I'm just trying to find an agenda here so I can see where we're at in terms of our time. Yeah, so we have some time for question and answers. And actually, in terms of, other than specific to Indian Ed, if you have any questions about or wish to have a conversation around any other federal programs, this is a time. If it's something, Dr. Blea knows a lot, but there are some things that she may not know. If something that none of the rest of us know either, we'll try to get back to you and respond to that. I do want to do a shout out though to Dr. Martinez Paponi in the back there. One of the reasons, like she said who she was just very briefly, but I think she and her colleague back there have been taking furious notes on things that you are all asking for more detailed data on, because that is what she and the other members of her team do for APS. So there actually is a data sheet that Dr. Martinez Paponi put together that I got last night that I will also share out when we do the follow-up to this meeting as well. With that, Mr. Petit, I know you had possibly some other questions, but I think maybe they got addressed. Are there any other questions or comments regarding our unified application that any of you would like to ask?
Mr. Parson, can an individual pueblo or tribe schedule a visual consultation with yourself and the tribe?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe Dr. Gonzalez spoke to this too.
One of the concerns we had was the data not being more specific, and that's some of our questions I, as an acting lieutenant, going to have for my community, for my kids. So can we possibly sometimes in the future schedule a meeting with one-on-one with my governor and my tribal council and certainly regarding our kids?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Anything?
I have one. This last one I promise for this section. Just generally speaking, or it can be as specific as you want. If you made the example of like funding isn't the issue for one of the title funds, it's the providers. What happens to carryover? That's a really huge concern for tribes. Does that carryover continue forward? Does it have a lifespan? Does it go back to the federal government? Can it go into an unreserved fund for APS to use for something else? Talk a little bit about how, because I'm sure there's a pretty substantial carryover in these funds. And if I'm incorrect about that, you could just say, no, we use every cent to the year. But what happens to these carryover funds and who gets to make the decision about how they get used? I'm sure they're specific per title, but if you could address that to the governors, that'd be great.
It depends. So Title I, you can carry over 15%. If you have that, there's a waiver you can fill out every couple of years. We haven't filled it out in the past because we haven't had more than 15%. In Title II, you can carry over 100%. So it just depends on the title. Medicaid is not reimbursable, so it's there. I mean, it's revenue. So it doesn't carry over because it at this point doesn't expire. It's a fund that we can use. If we have carryover, the majority is in vacancy savings. So if we are planning to hire a teacher and we don't hire a teacher until January, then that first semester's salary is vacancy savings. I can tell you that we do our best, even if there is vacancy savings, to move money around so that if, for example, we need additional PD, and we have vacancy savings, we sweep that $50,000 or whatever it is to pay for the PD, because the overall goal of title money is to use it in the year that it's awarded. So as much as possible, we try to do that. We probably will have carryover. It's something that we have to we crunch our numbers and then we wait for the state to say, this is your carryover. But we do our best to spend in the year. If there is carryover, what it is just added to kind of the number I gave you. So for example, if we have $30 million in Title I as our award, and we have $2 million in carryover, then it will just continue to be added to the initiatives already laid out. If we want a new initiative or something outside of the application, then we need to amend our application. The PED would have to reapprove it. So the goal is that, yes, the general scope remains the same, and we work with our planning award and then anticipated carryover, which in most cases is vacancy savings.
So I got a question, but it's in more context to what's going on right now. So we're talking about Title I funding, Title II funding, and I think Title III, but you guys don't have Medicaid up here. And we're talking like this about, we're talking about it like it's gonna be here next year. And so, I don't know, I'm looking for some guidance. Is there funding for next year? When does your fiscal year start? When does your fiscal year end? How much funding do you have? And then are we in a somewhat of a, when I see Title I through IV and Medicaid, federal funding, I think we might be secure on our state funding. But to me, these are the real kind of questions kind of going on, because we're talking about Title I through IV and Medicaid like it's going to be here in 6 months. When we go home and I look at the news every night, there's something different to take it down. And so I'm just trying to get a feel for where we're at and a feel for where APS feels comfortable, that this stuff is going to carry on, or if they take away 34, 37, 39, about $40 million away from us. How do we react to that? Or how do we respond to that?
So I'll do my best to answer your question. Medicaid revenue, I don't want to use the word okay. We're pretty secure for at least another fiscal year in terms of Medicaid revenue. Now, that's if we receive nothing else. So that buys us some time to work with other things. We understand, however, that because there is some uncertainty with Titles I through IV, we don't want to overwhelm Medicaid. So when I'm telling you we're not panicking, we're planning, we're looking at that. The other thing we're prioritizing is schools. So for example, if everything goes away today, what do schools need to exist? What does a standard school need? They need a counselor, they need a nurse, they need a principal, they need teachers. That is what we're planning to secure with whatever funding we have. Most of it would be state funding, and then anything else that we have. We have additional funding from other places. These are just the bigger pots. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we're looking at how can we hold schools harmless as much as possible so that we move and reallocate what we have authority to so that they can function.
Sure. And I appreciate your explanation, because we don't have no answers. I know you all don't have no answers. We don't have no answers. The people who are doing this in DC don't have no answers. And so, but I think it's the elephant in the room that we kind of need to address. And then just to throw this one out there too, because it might affect your system or APS or Valencia County, might affect different school districts. But they're also looking there's another consultation going on tomorrow for BIE schools. And they're looking, are they going to shut down BIE schools? If they shut down BIE schools, what's the plan for BIE schools or the BIE students? Are they going to be sent to APS? So, there might be an influx of students within APS. I'm not sure if that goes for other charter schools. I'm not sure what other type of federal funding there is for different types of schools, but if that funding also gets cut off and APS is the only thing open, there might be a flood of students into APS or Valencia County or what these other school districts may be. So, yeah, we're on pins and needles because education's important. We've been talking about how important education is this morning, but then we're getting put up against something of like, is education going to exist in this type of setting after next year or after a year and a half?
And you bring up a good point with the BIA schools, and I think that's something that the program has been alert to, and I think is in communication with a potential plan if that happens. I do want to say this would significantly impact what APS does. Like, there's no way you can lose this type of funding and I can look you in the eye and say, oh yeah, we're gonna continue as usual. It's significant. But with that being said, again, we're planning and prioritizing what to hold harmless, and then what are things that, we won't, how close is the dollar to the student? And that's kind of what we're prioritizing and looking at. So no, I mean, I agree with everything you said, and I think that's where we need you all as community members, as tribal members, to help us with the blind spots. What are we not seeing? What haven't we considered? Because we're trying to do this as best we can, but that's why these partnerships are so crucial.
Thank you. I wanted to ask to your question, what does school need to do to exist? And part of the question under Chairman and Lieutenant Governor is that issue, the uncertainty and what's going on at the federal level. And through this process, APS process, not assuring that this is going to be existing in the next year or so. But historically, Native American tribes, Native communities have seen historically first programs that cut our Native American programs, resources. How can APS assure us Native tribes that to be part of that discussion as far as crunching of the numbers? Can we be part of that process instead of being just told, here's what's going to happen? We need to be part of that discussion. We need to be part of that table when that happens, because a lot of time historically we've been left out and our kids have been left out. So when we talked about before getting to Valencia School and other kids going to other different schools, so let's have the tribes be involved in that decision. How do we continue the education? Because education has to continue. Health, housing, all those things are very important to cities, but also to Native American communities. So what I'm saying is that we need to be part of that uncertainty. What needs to happen to school for the school to continue? APS needs to continue to exist as APS.
So I think you asked a couple questions, and apologize for interrupting you. The first one of the things I've noticed in this role since July is the way, and again, it's no one's fault, it was the way in which the system was set up being siloed. The consultations that were ongoing were not comprehensive. And so tribal consultation's probably the exception. But private school consultation, working with charters, we're all an LEA, we're all a community. So what we've done in those instances is have consultations more frequently. Because what you all told us in October is still partially true, but the circumstances in March are very different. So not necessarily that we change the model of what we're doing, but potentially the frequency, because a lot of questions we can't answer, and in 30 days, 60 days, we may have answers. And so that's where I think the consultation method in general with our community partners as it relates to our common students needs to increase in frequency, and we've done that with other stakeholders. So I think that's a partial answer to your question, so that you guys don't leave here and say, okay, see you in October, and things change massively between now and then. What needs to exist for a school would be the personnel needed to teach students. The majority of that funding comes from the state. So we feel confident in saying kids will have teachers, we'll have principals, we'll have nurses, we'll have counselors, we'll have what students need to learn. A lot of our instructional materials, a lot of that comes from the state. So what a standard school needs, we're pretty sure that we can move things around and shuffle so that students can have what they need. Again, understanding this is significant.
Question here. So, in addition to what he asked, would you be able to provide us a listing of the plan on how you plan to distribute funds, so that we have our eyes on it too, among the tribes? So, the plan you're saying you're working on, just to a contingency plan for if things go south.
I think it's something we can share as we get more information, because right now the plan is we're receiving title funds.
Right.
Until we're told we're not, which could happen at any time, the plan is we're receiving it, so you've been privy to the plan. I think the answer is yes to your question.
Thank you.
And as we continue to update the board, that's also another way that we're updating, because they're asking the same questions. Like, okay, how many people are paid out of this account? What does it look like if this funding source goes away? So the answer to your question is yes, and I think that comes back to your question about we just probably need to be doing this a little bit more frequently, at least in the interim, so that you're aware, we get your input, we're aware, because you all are just such crucial partners, and you've brought up a lot of really good things today that we need to make sure we are considering. So yes, that's an easy yes.
Dr. Playa,
Hang on, there's one more question, but go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
I think this may be beneficial to the group. Could you discuss the authorization in Congress for the titles versus Medicaid and the timeline therein, just so they get a sense of the flow and when flows could potentially be interrupted?
I'll do my best. So it depends on what happens in the Senate right now. Part of what's going on is what happens in the Senate. With the continuing resolution, they have to fund the government, which yesterday, last night, it didn't look like it was going to pass. And then this morning, it looked like it might pass. And then I haven't seen the news since lunch, so I don't know. But what I will say is I think the first step is that. And that initial hit in what I see is Medicaid. That's going to be the first hit that we take. And then it kind of goes from there. The other thing to think about is if, and I don't want to speak for the PED or on the PED's behalf, but if federal funds do go to the states, we have to consider the infrastructure of the PED right now. It'd just be like them going directly to us. It's very difficult as it is to manage these level of funds. And so just by saying we'll give them to the states, that kind of creates another layer of issues, and although we would still have the funding, it's just that's the reality of what's happening. So I don't know if I answered your question, but a lot will depend on what happens with this continuing resolution. And then if they don't pass it, what is the negotiation around what happens next? But I think the concern is right now, everything's on hold, which is kind of what's a little stressful. If I can go to, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay.
That was actually part of my question. My understanding is, of course, the monies are still there, but if they go directly to the states, it will be in the form of block grants, right? And if it's in the form of a block grant, who makes the decision as to how the money is allocated? Because right now, we know that we have to put so much into Title I, for example. If you're 75% free and reduced lunch, we have to make sure that those children are taken care of. We have IDEA. We have certain things that have to be funded. But my understanding is that if it goes in the form of a block grant, does that go to PED? Are they the ones who determine how the money is distributed?
It would go to PED.
Okay. Now we know who to bug.
And that kind of leads just to where I want it to go. And I know you have the floor right now. I know you're trying to answer these questions as best we can, because the uncertainty there. But I would also like to hear from Ms. Juanico, if she has anything to say on this matters or on these things, because she is the representative from the Mexico BED. We haven't really talked with the state yet about the initiatives or how they might be reacting to any of these. So I'm just wondering if she has any comments to the conversation that's also going on right now.
So you are doing really well at answering questions, so thank you. Damien and I were talking about how on point you are, so thank you. So tribal leaders, in response to what's happening at the federal level, I can assure you we're kind of in the same boat. It's a holding kind of our decisions at PED, but you can guarantee that Governor Lujan Grisham has made it very clear that anything that's released at the federal level, the secretaries are usually called into the office to discuss next steps. How is this going to affect all the programming and staff? I mean, the announcements of the federal cuts affect PED staff as well. And we have those emergency meetings about how are we going to continue funding even our PED staff that are funded federally. And so all across the board, I feel like we're all in the same boat. It's a waiting game, but rest assured, we do the same things. Meet, what is the plan? The most important thing, Secretary Designate, she's not designate anymore, she's been confirmed. Secretary Padilla always says is, let's not be reactive. If you've been watching the news, right, there's an announcement, and then our first instinct is to create scaredness and react. We are being cautious about that in what we release to our grantees, to our partners, that we gather enough information. A lot of the times it's just thrown out there and then it doesn't even transpire. And we create scaredness. And so that's what we're trying not to do. In terms of state funding, we have asked, tribal leaders have asked me, how are our dollars that are released to published tribes and nations from Indian education going to be affected, if at all? Well, when we talk about BIE tribally controlled schools not receiving funding, those students need some place to go. They will most likely go to the to a public school. Those numbers affect the amounts that you get. If we see higher student counts, more than likely the awards will decrease. We have to play with the numbers. It's very similar to what's happening within the districts. But again, session, we are 8 days away from finishing session. You all know about Governor Lujan Grisham's $50 million proposal. We are not going to reach the 50 million. And so if you all have been carrying on through the session, it's looking a little more like 30 million. That will be the end mark, 30 million for each year over 3 years. And something under Governor Lujan Grisham's proposal is that we flip-flop the way the fund operates. More funding going directly to published tribes and nations, a little less to districts and charters. And so as you hear the information here, part of my job is then to remember, when we say less to districts, these are also the things that we're potentially affecting. And so as you get your award for fiscal year 26, published tribes and nations will see more funding than they have in previous years. What we're really advocating for all of you to do, tribal leaders, is to think about how your tribal education departments supplement and support the districts. If it's 520 certified individuals, how can you offer some of the large pieces of funding that you're getting to support that? The 520 certification process is a big hot deal, and we can change that in legislation. It will require a bill. Right now, 520 certificate holders are not paid as regular teachers. They're not really part of the equation as a regular teacher. Instead, we're having to supplement those salaries. And one thing that can happen that has to be a legislation change. And so Secretary Padilla is already starting those conversations, is rather than using the Indian Education Fund, how are those teachers supported through the funding that the districts already receive? And so, again, just really supporting everything that was mentioned here. The other thing, tribal leaders, and we're going to start our visits pretty soon. I think I secured one with Santo Domingo. We're going to have conversations about their grants. What has stopped us in session around the 50 million? And you probably heard it too. Legislators want to see the outcomes. If our published tribes and nations are not producing outcomes, how can we continue to increase funding for them? And so just like APS is asking right now, we need your support at PED to help us gather that data so we can go into session the next year and say, here are the outcomes. Give us more funding. And so again, I just want to reiterate how supportive we are in attending to the federal issues, but also to our district partners, that we are partners. We are not working against one another, and then our partners are also all of you. So please expect us to come visit you soon. You can always, just like the question was here, just as districts are required to do consultation, the state is required to do consultation. And so I will be going to visit your communities very soon, and so I'll be anticipating all the hard questions.
Okay, hopefully.
So thank you, Dr. Blaine.
You're welcome. And hopefully we'll see you all sooner rather than later so we can follow up on our conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So you heard Dr. Blea speak to Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are programs for across the district for all students, and how some of those funds are all the same being used specifically for some supports for programming for our Native American students, and that also there's some other potential ways we might strategize how to utilize those funds going forward. Thing I want to share with you is on specifically looking at Indian education and how we're funded, and following on some of the things you've just heard, I try to do this in a way where we can kind of start to wrap our minds around what this might look like, what will be affected by each piece of this. Because Indian education relies on multiple funding streams, and that's an understatement. Dr. Blade talked about a unified application. Indian Ed is probably as far away from a unified application you can possibly get. Looking just at federal programs, so Indian education is Johnson O'Malley, so we are BIE. We are Title VII Impact Aid. We are Title VI Indian Education Act, plus what you heard about in the unified application for other titles. Just to kind of ballpark this, just so you have in mind, like Dr. Blea said, as of today, looking at this, how we're funded, rule of thumb about $350,000 through Johnson O'Malley. Okay, so if this federal government totally redoes how they do BIE, I have no idea what that means for our Johnson O'Malley funds. So right now, that pays for our college and career counselor. It pays for, and I'll show you how it looks. We would have nothing from Garcia's, nothing from the Indian Public Cultural Center for our next tribal consultation. I don't know what we'll eat, but it'll be pretty skinny. And similar impact aid. But if you think about impact aid, how it plays out in some of your communities, it's a lot of money. Here in APS, not so much, because for us to get the funds, it has to be based on students who actually reside on tribal lands who are attending schools in APS. So the portion of, and it's one of those funds that have just been chronically underfunded at the federal level. The districts never, ever get the amount of money that they're supposed to get for this. So I think we got the most we ever got this past school year for Indian Ed. It was about $25,000. So that's all we got. Looking at Title VII, this is probably the one that's making me the most anxious. Title VI. This comes directly out of the U.S. Department of Education, and it is, as of this moment, we are projecting about $1 million. Okay, but depending on what happens there, that we may or may not get that. I was half joking that I'm happy to see that there's at least somebody still there that's sending emails to sign up for webinars for the Title VI application. So at least at this moment, the plan is that we'll still have some sort of funding there. So looking forward to that. And we can go into much more detail on these. Just gauging the energy in the room, we probably won't. But if we need to, if there's any specific questions about it, I'll be happy to go back and revisit that. But at this point, are there any questions about any of these federal programs that we fund Indian Ed through?
I was just going to say that Johnson O'Malley for this upcoming year, I'm not sure what's going to be funded, and we're in the same boat with everybody else. That the JOM fundings that we're seeing for 2025 are reduced if some amount, and I don't know if it's just a calculation error, but I don't know what you've seen.
Ours came very late, or I think it was late, or it came early. It might have been that they were trying to get it to us before everything just went to pot. So we got about, I think it's in the hopper for our board to approve, about $250,000 that we got like a month ago. And so, so at the moment, we do have Johnson O'Malley funding that'll at least get us through October, I guess. Yeah. And as Charlene was sharing, so, and you manage it not only for Isleta, but for Los Ranch, or Los Lunas schools too, or? Okay, so we won't speak for them. So, but, you know, like when I was a student in Tuba City, it paid for my running shoes for track, Johnson O'Malley. Johnson O'Malley does stuff like that still. But we utilize it for other things that just really none of the others grants that we get allow us to do some of the things that we're able to do with Johnson O'Malley. So it's a really nice bit of funding to have. The other thing I want to point out to the APS staff that are holding out and still here is that one of the things to bear in mind, and for any of you, the rest of you in here, so we have our tribal leaders here who are with us today. But as you also heard, they work with the state, and they're in close communication with the state. They're also in constant communication at the federal level as well. And so in terms of advocacy, in terms of partnership, it's probably more than any other partners that we have in the district, you are probably our strongest allies in terms of issues like this that we're facing. So just to keep that in mind. So like I've received an invite for us to potentially participate in this conversation around BIE for tomorrow, just to listen in to kind of see where we're at. Because there's just a lot of uncertainty in the air right now. Now, in terms of the state, so this is simplifying it. This is, I only have 6 bars there. There's actually more like 10. And so, like, we receive a block grant for Indian education from the state. We receive that's about $500,000. 3 more that we get, these heritage language grants, that's about $750,000. And the Indigenous Education Grant, that's another $200,000, but we're in the last year of that, so that may very well be going away. We did receive reimbursement for Type 520 licensure to help defray the costs of paying them as fully licensed teachers, but there's never any guarantee that we'll have those funds again. So just to be bearing in mind, so these, like Dr. Blay was talking about, so, if this is not there, what do we have to fall back on? Just be thinking about, what do we have to work with here? We receive also bilingual multicultural education funds. Those, for the most part, go directly to the schools. We are in close partnership with Language and Cultural Equity, so we'll be taking, I'm sure, a very close look at how we fund our language teachers going forward. Hopefully for the next school year too, our Zuni preschool will be funded through the Early Childhood Education departments. And so that will help defray some of the costs that currently are being paid out of the main state funds. And then the dollars that pay for everything else in the district, the general operational funds, actually do pay for part of Indian Ed. It pays for my salary, it pays for our instructional manager's salary, and for the people who help set up lunch for us today and help sign you in. Our clerical office staff, and then office supplies. So altogether, Indian Ed comes to about 1.4 million at the state, or at the federal level right now. Ballpark-ish 1.5 million at the state level, and hopefully with all the things, I'll keep bugging Katie Ann and her team to make sure that we come out at least pretty close to that in the coming school year. And then hopefully a little bit more money in Bilingual Multicultural Education Act funds, and then about 150,000 more for early childhood. So with all of that, we're hoping to not have a crash landing, but to have a a softer landing. I just wanted to give you an image. So when it comes to funding Indian Ed, this is what it looks like when you start. It's just lots of scraps and rags, and you got to figure out what you're going to do with it all. Because each funding stream is really not a program in itself. It's it's raw material to make a program. And so you braid things together. And for each student, the pathway for any student, like the students you met here today and that are sitting in the back here, there's no one fund source that ensures their education continues the way it is. Like the Zuni student who stood up here this morning, in order for that Zuni 3 and 4 course to be created, it required the input of a lot of people who are not paid out of Indian Ed, working with folks like myself who are paid out of our operational dollars. It comes to the scheduling, the enrollment, the classrooms, the lights. We had the facilities person here earlier this morning. All that comes into play. The teacher, though, that he has right now is paid out of Title VI. So if that money goes away, we would have to figure out how to continue to pay for his Zuni programming. The Seals and Stoles, Johnson O'Malley is making that possible. The person coordinating that's how they're paid. So the judges that are over there today, some are paid out of Title VI, some are out of Indian Ed at the state, some are partially paid through the bilingual multicultural education program, and eventually some of them are going to be out of the early childhood as well. So it's a really complex mosaic for every child as we support them through the district. The Navajo student even more comes into play because also those competitive language grants that I talked about are paying for somebody to coach the teachers that are supporting that student. So those two young ladies who were here this morning were able to get their bilingual seal from Navajo Nation. All of these programs that we do are reliant on continuing to receive funds from the federal government, to receive funds from the state, at least at this point where we're at. And so as you think about these things, as you advocate for these things, like Dr. Blea was saying, and as Katie Ann was saying too, you know, for us to be able to continue to have these programs, not just right here in the district, and even to continue to grow them and to support more languages, everything, we somehow have to not only be able to advocate for the continuation of the funding we're already receiving, but also how do we get more funding for these programs, because we're just getting started. And then, like I said, so this tribal consultation was brought to you by state, federal, and local funds. So without all of these, we could not have pulled off a tribal leader consultation. Mr. Sandoval did not take a bus, but he did walk his students, which required a librarian who's funded out of operational dollars to be here, and his salary, which is paid out of Indian Education Act at the state level. And so, so all of these things matter. Now, I'm not going to talk much further on this, and then I think just so we can have a conversation here. What we're working towards, I think what you've heard others say here today is, you know, we're certainly wanting for our students, like the students that were here today, to achieve and to be successful. One wants to be a court recorder, one wants to be a doctor, but as some of you have said, but you also want them to come back to your communities to be the future of your communities as well. And so in our language agreements with Navajo Nation, there's these key terms, revitalization and perpetuation. How I've heard, like Dr. Gregory Kahete put it is, or as Mr. Sandoval kind of puts it, so thinking about the future, what kind of ancestors do we want our students to be for those coming up? And so, what foundation for as yet unknown generations do we want to be laying for them today? So what kind of ancestors are we building for our future here today? And with that, and your roles here as tribal leaders help us to craft our vision for what that is to be. The guidance we have from the state helps to kind of direct that in some ways, but really without your input, what we have, or what I showed in the original image, are these fragments, these pieces, these rags, and so it's really important for your input to continue to be provided. As you offered, as we're doing these things, as we make our decisions, speaking to your role, how you would like to be part of that. With that, I'm going to stop right there. Let Lieutenant Governor wake up a little bit. And anybody, any questions, any comments about anything I said or about anything in general that you wish to make sure to speak to here in this moment while we're here together?
Are you ready to close it?
No, not quite yet. But are you feeling ready for closing?
I mean, it's up to, with your presentation, cutting it short, I'm just asking you.
No, so...
if there's any more speakers that need to...
Yes.
So tribal leaders, we're about headed out to, I just wanted to tell you the next steps and again, reiterate why we're here from the state. Tribal consultation has been shared as one of the concerns. Maybe not happening the way we want it to be happening so that it's efficient for the outcomes of our students. And so really today was a learning experience for me. The next steps will include a follow-up to Phil to give him some feedback on what we think might be more appropriate or what we thought was great. Congratulate him on the job well done and his presenters. But that will be the next step, really for tribal leaders, for all of you to know that we've heard you. And our next step as the Indian Education Division team, again, is to monitor these consultations. So you should be seeing us more frequently at the district level to ensure that we're getting your your questions answered, we're getting the support that you need. But on behalf of APS, they're one of our biggest grantees at the state. So again, as we move into the way we're flip-flopping the way the Indian Education Fund works at the state, asking you to, on behalf of the state, to be supportive of the district. If they ask for funding, to think creatively how we can support them. Because again, for this next fiscal year, we are really awarding more funding to Pueblos, tribes, and nations, acknowledging that you all have the cultural capacity to tell us what's best for your own students. But in that way, really still working in partnership with the districts. So I ask that of you. You'll hear some announcements coming from me very soon. Friday is a very important day. House Bill 2 hasn't been released to us just yet, so House Bill 2 will show the total appropriations across the state. You'll get to see how much Indian education is funded for some of those reauthorizations. You'll see that information there. As soon as it's released, I will share that with you, tribal leaders, also with our district partners, because they too are part of that conversation. On Friday, I'm meeting with Secretary Padilla to talk about the allocation and final award amounts. From there, we'll then talk to Governor Lujan Grisham before that information is released. The other thing that's happening is the rule proposal, 6.35.2 NMAC. Some of you submitted feedback for that. That rule determines how those allocations are awarded in the future. And so that rule will go for public comment very soon. The next step is for Governor Lujan Grisham to review the rule before it goes to public comment, and that will happen next week. So a lot of things happening that involve our Pueblos, tribes, and nations, but also our districts and charters. They are part of that conversation as well. So thank you, Phil and Superintendent Blakey, for the invitation. We'll follow up soon, and tribal leaders have a safe drive home.
With the rulemaking, will allocations of funding be part of the rulemaking? So if there's going to be a percentage that will be based on population and a percentage that will be based on a general amount given to each of the pueblos, tribes, and nations, is that going to be part of the rulemaking, or will that be determined every year based on, and if it's going to be determined every year, how can we keep up with how that money is going to be allocated?
So thank you, Dr. Pacheco, for the question. So that'll be decided by the governor's office, the run through next week. When it goes to public comment, I'll be able to, maybe we'll host an emergency call for tribal partners so you all can see the language that's going for public comment. So I can't speak to that just yet because we haven't given the due diligence to the governor's office to review. I will also provide a memo to Governor Mountain to share all the feedback that was provided from the four entities, Pueblo of Sandia being one of them, so that they too see the feedback, and it's me not leaving out your feedback as it gets to the governor's office. So I'll have more information on after Friday, after next week for sure, for Pueblos, Tribes, and Nations, for tribal leaders specifically, but also our LEAs will be part of that conversation. How can you secure it in the next 3 years? I mean, we secured the $30 million per year for the next 3 years. The rule will determine that, right? So it's really important what's in the rule. If those percentages are there, the rule has to follow. But anyone after me, anyone after Governor Lujan Grisham can decide to change the rule at any moment. And so that's where your voices come into play. The act is harder to adjust. That's adjusting the law. So again, the rule is something you want to keep an eye on. When my term ends, when Secretary-designate Padilla is out, when Secretary Padilla, when Governor Lujan Grisham finishes her term, that's out of our hands thereafter.
I would just like to ask all of the leaders that are here to advocate for the allocation of the funding to be part of that rule. Because if it is not, then another tribe, nation, or pueblo could go in and advocate for a bigger piece of the pie, and then that could be done behind closed doors, and we wouldn't know until the monies went out, which is what's happened previously. So please, pueblos, make sure that you go in and let Governor Lujan Grisham know that we would like for the funding allocations to be part of that rulemaking so that we can ensure that the pueblos are getting a fair amount of that money.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco. And part of that, the rule will include a base amount for LEAs, right? That's something we want to advocate as well. Not only do Pueblos, Tribes, and Nations get to see a base amount, the LEAs get a base amount with their student count added to that award amount. So APS, just alone from the grants that you all get, 27901, the fund code, APS received around $503,322.00, right? So we want to ensure that for the next fiscal year, that's not decreasing. We'd love to have it increase, but again, Phil, I know I heard you mention this, for sure trying to keep our eye on not seeing a decrease in what you received. Thank you. I'll see you all soon, tribal leaders. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. All right, so at this time, we'll go ahead and provide an opportunity for our tribal leaders who are still with us to speak to, make any final statements that they like to make, and also any final questions they would like to pose. And so, and we can start. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Thank you, Superintendent, School Board. Thank you, Tribal Leadership, Governor's Lieutenant. Thank you for the opportunity on behalf of San Domingo Pueblo. This has been a really nice experience for me as far as seeing the process, APS process involving our Native kids. Continue doing your best. I mean, that's really the ask. We don't know the certainty as far as at the federal level, but certainly continue doing your best. When we drop off our kids here at your schools, this district, this area, you become our mothers and their fathers. And that's really our cultural way as far as handing them off to you for that guidance, for that education, and for that knowledge, and certainly the nurturing for our kids. As we see our kids back here, you know, I hope they're taking it all in, so to speak, because it's really what it's all about. For our community, again, I think Lieutenant Governor here said that we don't ask to be standing here as a Lieutenant Governor or Governor, but it's certainly an honor to speak on behalf of your community. your elders, your little ones, and the ones that are yet to come. But it's important that we continue collaborating, create these partnerships together on behalf of the kids moving forward. But for me personally, as an acting lieutenant governor, on behalf of my governor, Thomas Omakino, continue, superintendent, school board, and your staff, please, and then staff, not often get that pat on the back, that thank you that they deserve, because that requires a lot of attention. Again, they become mothers and fathers to our kids. So please let your staff know, please let your teachers know. Thank you on behalf of my community, Senator Domingo Polo. Thank you. Later, kiddos. Have a good evening. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
This place emptied out real quick. I just like to say, I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to APS for facilitating this crucial consultation, and to the tribal leaders sharing and expressing their concerns. As tribal leaders, we need to all collaborate and be advocates for our children, because they're the ones that have to face this each day in our schools. And this type of consultation is vital for our tribal communities, ensuring that our education, our students receive and meet their needs of expectations. We must maintain this type of communication and collaborations with our stakeholders. This is important for us to move forward. And like Lieutenant Governor Juan says, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what to expect. Each time you turn on the news, there's something different. Right now, it's all like a chess game to us. They move here, we move there, and it's an uncertainty. And that's something that it's hard to relax, or having some type of a consent to be relieved, or because of all the situation that's going on. So I just want us to keep this type of collaborations going on, and just listening to all this information that's been shared. This is my first time being in an environment like this, in consultations, and it's just raising a lot of questions. Where are we leaving things? What are things being left that is not brought to our attentions? Like being proactive instead of reactive is one of the key things. We can identify the issues or problems, but we really need to concentrate on the framework of having some type of resolutions. And with this type of environment, type of collaborations, things will happen. It may not happen overnight, but it will happen if we stick together and are sovereign. We're here for us, and I hope the Hill sees it that way. Give us that type of empowerment. And I just want to say thank you, APS, tribal leaders, for your concerns, educators, all that's here that voiced. Thank you, and that's my comment. You have a good day.
Yeah, on behalf of Governor Charles Riley, again, I want to thank you for all the information presented, and for allowing us to be here to discuss and open all the issues and concerns we have. In closing, I just want to say that there definitely has to be more communication, ongoing communication, every day almost, to address all the concerns we have and to continue to voice things that happen as they happen, especially now. We feel like, I think, speak for all the pueblos and all the tribes, nations here, that we feel we're picked on the most right now, coming from Washington, D.C. A lot of our programs and things that concern education are being taken away. And something we're going to continue to fight for sure. We need more info, and we we appreciate everything you presented, but definitely more details. I think the deeper we go, the better we have an understanding of what's going on, and the better we can serve you and be proactive, as is being said, to address those concerns that are affecting the smallest of the student, the shyest student, the one that doesn't have a voice. So definitely, the more info that can be provided, the better for us. And again, transparency, being open with this, sharing with all the tribes. We're having issues with our own district, school board and superintendent, where information is being withheld, and we don't know. We don't know how our students are doing. We don't know where we can be of service and help to get our children further along where they need to be. Bring those numbers up, like we keep saying. So I encourage everyone here to continue to be open with those discussions, and we definitely hope to keep sharing our voices and add to those plans and strategies that will help our children. But in closing, thank you for everything you do for our children now. We really appreciate it, and it's great to see everyone that goes through the system come out on top and continue to come back to our communities and help us where we need it. And again, it's repeated as well that who knows who will step into these shoes going into the future, and they'll be the decision makers for our people going forward. So thank you for all you do for our children.
On behalf of Governor Chavez and the leadership Pueblo of Sandia, I would really like to thank Mr. Farson, because you have been a tremendous partner with us, and every time that we have had concerns and come to you, you have given immediate assistance, and it is very much appreciated, so much so that Governor Chavez has asked me to look at how we can move the majority of our students out of another district, I'm not going to name, into APS, because we're getting a much better outcome with the APS system. So I do want to leave on that note and let you know that the Pueblo of Sandia and the leadership has been very gratified by the response that we receive. We're very grateful to you for that, and we want to continue that partnership in a positive way. We know that funding is going to be a challenge for the LEAs going forward, so again, we want to figure out ways to use some of the funds so that we can, in partnership with you, make sure that outcomes continue to be strong for our children. Thank you.
Cool. Before I get to my closing remarks, I just have one question. School board, are the school board, are they school board or APS board? Don't know the exact title, but how many positions are there? When do elections happen? And then how do you become eligible to run or be a candidate to be on the school board?
Are you hoping to run?
but I'm like.
Oh, Charlene? So there are 7 positions in the APS school board. As you may have heard, I think there's 7 districts. I can't, maybe somebody here who's more of a political junkie has got it memorized better, but number 7, I believe, is up in Northeast. And so.
So real quick, there are 7 different districts. There are elections are every November. This November, they're every other November. I lied. This November, there are 3 seats.
Okay. And then we can find out that information on probably APS website. Okay, great. I think that's something as tribal nations we need to consider and to look at and maybe to put forward a candidate from one of our communities that may best serve or fit into one of these districts. And, I think that's just another way that we can change the adults of behaviors, is by getting our parents or our communities a little bit more involved. And so that's just one kind of point I wanted to make. What I have to close is, first of all, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Farson, Ms. Campos, and the presenters, Dr. Gonzalez, Dr. Blay. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for coming in front of us and not just listening to us or not just talking to us, but thank you for having a conversation with us. Thank you for, to me, that's a consultation. To me, when there's dialogue and we're talking about substantive issues, substantive matters, and we are all kind of aligning ourselves towards the same goals and the same wants. And I feel today that we had that conversation and we are trying to align ourselves to figure out what are the best steps forward, whether there's uncertainty or not. And so in the time that there is uncertainty and we're not getting a lot of information, we are here, glad you're here to talk with us about this and to share those, I don't know if they're emotional thoughts or what, but we know that something's going on and we are happy that, as was mentioned, that there's partners, that there's allies, that there's people here, that we all have the same goal, that education is important to our children, and that's the way for us to lift ourselves up and for us to change the future. Right now, maybe a learning experience, but maybe we're learning how to become better at doing what we're going to be doing in the future as being leaders or showing these kids a better path, that they don't do reactionary moves like what's going on right now. So yes, I think today was powerful. I think, and I'm very grateful for the students that were here. I know it's hard when they're young because these topics are going over their head, but it's just good to be in the room. And that's kind of how it is with our traditions and our language. Sometimes I'm in a room and there's our traditions and our languages being discussed and they're going over my head, but I'm still taking the time to pay attention and to learn a piece here and a piece there so that maybe I can incorporate that into me and maybe that will help me grow as well. So I'm happy that we did have a big group of students here. And then thank you to our tribal leaders. Thank you for your comments today. Thank you for your words. I appreciate your leadership. I look up to it and I look forward to learning from you guys like I do all the time. So thank you, Halwa. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you from the Pueblo of Laguna and Governor Antonio and the tribal leadership and APS leadership that are here. I just want to advise the data sharing is very, very important because we cannot do anything on our end if we don't know what's happening on your end. And that's very important to us because we have, the Pueblos have different programs that assist our families, whether it's in Laguna or Albuquerque. That way that collaboration can start and we can help the students and the families wherever it's needed. So that's very important, and I believe that, all the Pueblos want to have that, to make sure that their families are taken care of because we don't know what happens here in APS. We do have the calls monthly, which I do appreciate with Mr. Farson, but the data sharing is very important because that way, it's not just, the young lady who talked about what's needed, not just a sash, but what else can I help you with? Which name can I toss out for each of the Pueblos? Who can you contact? And to us and to me, that's very important because I went to the outside, just like all the tribal leaderships have said, go out, get your education, come back to the Pueblo or wherever you're from and bring it to your community. So I am one of those students who has done that. So moving forward, just the transparency, whether it's good or bad, we need to know. Tawae, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
I just want to quickly say Harkem, Data, and everyone here for helping us and being that voice for our students. I just want to say thank you for having this because, right now we're being challenged with who we are as unique people and as our state is rich in cultural identity, and on the federal level, that part is not necessarily being appreciated. But it's good to know that APS is keeping on that track of acknowledging the diversity, acknowledging our culture, and doing the work that we need to do so that we can remain who we are and that we can go ahead and grow and prosper and continue on our journey through this life, sharing our culture and heritage with everyone and our people. So just thank you for that. And, it's a lot of work, but we need to stay on that path no matter what's happening on the federal level.
So thank you all, our governors, our lieutenant governors, all of our other tribal officials, our community partners, our APS staff. Again, thank you, and thank you for holding out to the end with us on there. So I just also want to communicate some updates as well as the next steps. So one of the updates, so I've been with APS for 8 years now as the equity director. This January, they elevated my position to a chief, which means that I report directly to the deputy superintendent, and I'm also in academic leadership and leadership. So as the position of equity, but also as a Native woman, it is always very important to have those people in the room and at the table. So I am very humble, but very proud and very, I don't want to say excited, but ready to go in terms of being part of that representation and having that voice at APS. But I want to acknowledge APS for making that change. In addition to that, the previous departments under equity, which was Equity and Equal Opportunity Services, but now Indian Education, Language and Cultural Equity, and Newcomer Supports are under the equity lens on there. So while they were my colleagues previously, now we're working in a much more collaborative piece on there. So again, we're moving forward and doing good things and making sure that representation. Now, these changes were done prior to any administration, but the timing is actually a good timing. I've been, for the past couple of months, doing a lot more community meetings. And you know how it is sometimes, even with our families. We sometimes end up not getting together with them unless there's like either a sickness or a death, and then we get together and like, why are we only getting together when there's kind of these problems? But even saying that, we get together when no matter who we are, we get together when we see that there's a need. So when I want to acknowledge that all of us are getting together, everyone is seeing a need. Our Native communities, Hispanic communities, or African American communities, or Hispanic communities, and we're getting together and seeing there is a need. There's always a need, but there is a huge call to action now that we've never seen, I know, in my generation and probably my parents and even grandparents' generation. It's just a completely different world right now that we're living in on there. So we also need to start thinking much more strategically, because everything we've kind of had and said that this is kind of the processes are not the processes anymore. But saying that, particularly the last couple of months, particularly with our undocumented families that are having a really, really difficult time right now and going to these community meetings, it's just, again, getting with people, hearing people, it's important. And we all do this. We get really busy in our lives. We get stuck on our projects and our reports and everything we have to do, and we don't get out. So while it's unfortunately sometimes why we have to get out, I appreciate that. And I know I've been to tribal consultations now for the past 8 years, and I think there's always the good intentions. And I think we have been moving in a much forward capacity the last few years. But we always say, oh, we need to meet more than twice a year. And then just life happens. And then we're already back in fall. But like Dr. Blea said, the world we live in now is not an every 6 months. It's not even an every week. It's not even an every day kind of piece. So we really need to be cognizant of much more in real time now and how these are affecting. But also, I know with the superintendent, the deputy superintendent, and giving you my personal commitment to this is, yes, these consultations are important and we need to have them, but we also need to have much more of those one-on-one conversations. And that is a commitment that we are going to, and I give you that commitment, reach out and try to do those areas as well. And let's talk about information. Let's talk about data. APS is not perfect. We're not perfect. We're a large bureaucratic institution. We have 70,000 students, over 150 schools, the square mileage of APS. And we acknowledge that, but we also acknowledge how we need to move forward and be better on there. So I want to thank you all again. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it to Mr. Farson now to talk about the technical consultation paperwork I believe you need to fill out. So thank you, Hercom.
Yes.
I didn't hear you talk about any of the advances about the Native American, stuff like that we're talking about before.
Well, I got really sleepy during my presentation, so I didn't want to talk about it. But, you know, what I didn't talk about is, well, you see some of the products. So you saw, this is the first year we've ever offered Zuni 3 and 4. First year we've ever offered Navajo 3 and 4. It was our belief that if we've always offered like the introductory stuff, but you know, what would it take to get students to that level where we're confident that we are graduating them ready to continue on in whatever role are there for them within their tribal communities, to have the language skills to continue on, to mentor with elders, whatever it takes. But we've established that that foundation for them. And so, as you saw, it's a good start. We got 2 for our Navajo Nation. We're very close with some of our Zuni students. I was joking with Katie Ann. I said, next year there'll be like 40 Navajo kids, and you'll be like, that was, it'll just be like, it'll be like every day. But our goal is not, to not stop there. You know, as Lieutenant Governor, if you spoke to, we definitely want to build those pathways for our CARES students. We've been working with Charlene and Isleta on how, given the resources that the community has, how do we build a pathway for our Tiwa students? How do we do it for our other students from our other language communities as well? Because it can be done, and it's not, and that's been part of the challenge, is figuring out how we do this in a district like APS. And I think we've kind of figured out the basics of that. We're hoping to work with Sandia and being strategic on where those students are placed within the district so that there's a pathway for them within those schools. And whether the language program is provided in Sandia or within the schools, there's a pathway for that. So what we're trying to do is we recognize that for every community, it's not the same solution. So how do we work together with you to find those solutions that are specific to your community? And so that they are going on to become doctors and lawyers, but they're also coming back to do the work you need them to do within the communities. And they have the skills to do both. And so that is our vision. That's what we're working towards. As you've heard from our leadership here, they're committed to working with us on that. And yes, it's going to require us really being forward thinking on this, not just reacting. You know, regardless of what's happening outside in the world, how do we work together on these things so that we push forward towards these goals and we figure out how to make it happen regardless of what else is happening in the world. So thank you all for being here, for doing this. We have this is a tribal consultation, so please make sure somebody from your community hasn't run away with your tribal consultation form and that you fill it out. If you're not able to fill it out today, that's okay. We'll be following up with you, but so that my colleagues in other departments who have to submit to the state have the paperwork they need to document that they were here and they spoke to you about these things. So if you, and we'll have Dr. Blakey sign off on those and get those back to you. But with that, we have a tradition that who provides the first words provides us with the last words, and so we're at that point for our last words here. And it turns out, I guess Governor Ortiz wasn't able to make it, so Lieutenant Governor, it's all yours.
Thank you, everyone. Governor Ortiz just notified us, and he regrets not being here, but he sends your blessings, and everybody have good journeys to your homes, and he keeps you in his prayers. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and do the closing remarks. Tuoska ilmas Jaanus on soutsunsa, kun se haatama tiena me jaatetaan se naatjus ja anjana. Jaanus on soutsunsa, no että amma tuonne haani kuutjusti. On haaletti tsevässä, tuo heitti tiimosti ja mun seuraatsen, että asjan tii kuutsuatsen. Ke kuuatsen niin kasvatsen haan sosaatjemme. Että se hioja niin ammatsen yksi, niin kun se neljäkö, niin kun sitä ammassa hio heikamme. Ja niin kuutjus haatti nehtänsä, niin annasko. Mä sopen jos haatte suutsa, alitse toiset sitä itse haan, itse saavatsen, kada tihti da puhti da kuutti da haati hieni saavatsen, kada ne jos on sama saatsen paatjen siitä siihen se juhuus se harikaatissa se on se tihti se ei toiset se haatte naasti se nikustus arhemma kauma se ammasta on se että tonne se saa se ja me taapottiin ja tonne se hoppas aina se ammasta kohta tonne se haatsemana käytsä naatjitseen ja jamassa Jaanus on kootsansana tonne se just haatte tii suutsan haaste maasta ja mit siitä että aina niin kaatsi kuppuna ja oma uutse nautsen kun tot amma haan sosaat ja me kuutsen ja kahdessa tonne se jo haatte sotsura atsat tii koos ja se toke amma Jaani kun niin kootjusten jännestä ja kun niin kostuusa hun haani kohtaan, hun haaletti sen, että heitti jotsi tuossa ekasta tikutkum, että se tikutkum se ei ole näkö niin kootsen, jos päästet sen, että saa heitti tiiska aakste, miten mä ei ole siis haakka sen nyötsä, niin kustus, ali saa hemme tuoda näesän, jos on. Kehi ootsa käytä, tonne se jo seikkomme, että niin taapottiin ne kai halas juostin. Jo ihan että sijoittima, koska todin aamu suuttim, siis jo saa käytä, jo hakkada sairauskyvyt jaasi äänehti sijoitti, mutta tuonne haannetti ääni, tuonne kaatsakäytän, noin aamu äänis kaatsakäytän, hakkada sairauskyvyt, ei ole isku sauvatsakki, sijoitti, mutta jos on ääni kuhteetan, se tahtoi ne saanumasta ehkä, ja niin kuin ne sauskusta. Thank you, and you all have safe travels back to your homes. Thank you.
Keep in touch. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'll be right back. Excuse me, sir. Absolutely. Yeah, 8463 links. That's me. Absolutely. Do you have on a consultation? I found it.
Oh, maybe there is. Is there a fill out?
I got one.
No, one more over here.
So, some.
Are you willing to part?
But no, this is definitely.